Hi, and welcome to this fourth edition of the Salon. Today I'm joined by Neil Hawkes. He's an educationalist and developed the method called values-based education. He's also an advocate of ethical leadership, and through the International Values Education Trust, he promotes ethical living and leadership. His wisdom's had significant impact on schools, families, businesses, and communities, and he's leading what he calls a quiet revolution for social justice. He's also published a number of books related to his work, and although he's modest about his academic credentials, he also has a doctorate in education from Oxford University. So welcome. I want to begin by just asking you if you could give us a kind of brief overview of your history in education.
Well, hello, Paul. May I first of all say that I really feel it a great honor that you have invited me to this gathering, really. Um, I feel really humbled to have been chosen as a speaker. And I hope my thoughts and feelings and words resonate with you, the listeners, to this conversation. And please do contact me at any point in the future if I can clarify or you need me to talk with you. I always like these, what I call noble conversations, which helps us on the planet to get sort of thinking out into the world that does good in the world, just simply put. I think there's a great need now for us to uh, gather together those people who are wanting to really help humanity to flourish. And Paul, you are doing that so brilliantly by bringing us all together in the salon. So thank you.
Well, I'm
You asked,
certainly trying that.
you asked me about my background, which, you know, yeah, I'd nearly said incredible. I just can't believe I am where I am today. If you look back on my beginnings, really, from a school point of view, I wasn't a high flyer. I had certain talents, but I wasn't academically seen as a high flyer or anything. I had to struggle. I have a feeling now, at the age I am, that possibly I suffer from dyslexia in some form because I know in spelling tests and things, I used to get only 2 out of 10 or something, and my reading was a bit slow. And when I was at school, there were very few books about anyway, so I did struggle a bit. Thankfully, I overcame all that, and I'm quite a good speller now. But it took some time. So I left school quite young, really. I was 16, and I had these notions that perhaps one day I would be an actor or something, but those were probably delusions, although people used to ask me to take part in various little dramas and things. Anyway, I left school and got a job um, in a hospital laundry. And this was my growing up point. I don't know if listeners have ever worked with a group of women because they were women in this laundry. It was a hospital laundry, and I always remember working on a machine called the colander. And I had to feed clothes into this machine. It was hospital gowns and things, and the rollers would press it and all the rest. And there was a lady at the end, and I remember her very clearly, called Ada. And Ada, if I put these clothes through too quickly, she would shout obscenities at me to slow down. And so it was an incredible experience. So I grew up very quickly with Ada and these wonderful people. I have to emphasize that they were the salt of the earth, and they helped me to grow up. I then went on to various other jobs, but I have always had a passion for communication. And so I thought, well, I enjoy being with young people. So I think I would enjoy being a teacher, but I haven't got the qualifications. And so I signed up at the local college, and within 9 months, I gained the qualifications I needed uh, with good grades. I was very proud of myself. But it's amazing. One of my things I talk about is if you see a reason for doing something, it energizes you. And so I knew I wanted to be a teacher, so I had to get good grades. And I did in 9 months. So I went to Culham College near Abingdon in Oxfordshire and had the most amazing 3 years. I think I was really educated there. And there were some incredible tutors who took an interest in me. And I really took to teaching. Um, I looked at secondary education and primary education, and I had experience in both at the college. But I decided that I could have the biggest impact with primary school children. I thought if we get it right with primary school children, then that puts the foundation for others. You know, the Jesuits used to say, give me a child until 7 and I'll give you the man. And I went along with those sort of thoughts. And so I had this incredible time at Culham. And then in my final year there, we had to go to on final teaching practice. In those days, it was a whole term, not now when they do a year and they have a week or so. I did a whole term and I thought, I want to be in a really great school. So I went and said to the tutors, I really want to go to South Stoke School because I hear Peter Long is the head teacher, and all the students say he's incredible. So they said, well, Neil, yeah, all right, there is a space, so you can go to South Stoke, and that was one of the best things I ever did because this man, Peter Long, has always been one of my educational giants. He was incredible. I have modeled myself. People often say, who do you model yourself on? Well, Peter Long is one of the characters I model myself on because I used to watch him. I'm a people watcher. I love watching people. You learn from people watching. So I watched Peter and I saw that he was a great communicator and he was able to form relationships between the children and himself. He understood each child individually. He adapted himself so that he could draw on the child. He didn't have a blanket way of dealing with everybody. He just had this subtle intuition about how to get the best out of every child. In curriculum terms, he was very creative. He looked for first-hand experiences. Give the child experiences which are real. Make them real writers, real mathematicians, real artists. Give them experiences. Don't rush the curriculum. Let them have time and space to do this. And so I watched this and I modeled myself on this. And I just saw the results. These children were really being educated. They were being educated not just to pass examinations or to understand various parts of curriculum, but their very character of who they are was being nurtured by Peter. And so I've always said that that's important. I was lucky enough to do quite well as a student, and yeah, it just empowered me and motivated me to go on. And then I left college and taught in Swindon in the south of England, and my experiences continued. What was amazing, I gained promotion far too early. People nowadays saying, how on earth? So at 26, I was appointed as a head teacher in Maidenhead, a small country school. And there again, I had a mentor. Her name was Hazel, who was the deputy head. She knew far more than me, far more than me. And she taught me. And I then quickly went on to a very large school. And that was really good. So after 7 years, 8 years, I was appointed as a county advisor for education in Buckinghamshire. So, you know, my earliest stages of career development gave me the opportunity to look at good practice in education, to understand there's a difference between education and schooling. there's a difference between what we intuitively believe children should learn, if you really understand child development, and what politicians, governments, and people who know nothing about children will tell us that we ought to do because they are using an economic paradigm. I always remember last finish on this, Paul. I always remember a tutor at college explaining how in the 1870 Education Act in England really was all about how we ensure that ordinary people are geared up to clerk the British Empire. They weren't to be leaders of it, but they had to spell well, they had to write well, they had to be able to do computation well. So we didn't want them to think too much. That was left to the public school system. Read a book called Posh Boys if you want to follow up on this. And so I became, after that, very egalitarian. I support all schools, but I believe that we should give the best possible education to each and every child in the world if we are to ensure that humanity flourishes.
Okay, that's a brilliant opener because it raises so many issues and points already in my mind, and I'm sure it will with the audience when they see this. It also raises points that we'll come back to during the conversation, but maybe we can continue with your story, um, the connection with how you got into values-based education, which is what and what that is. And I'm wondering whether there's a connection there between what you just said about Peter Long and was that the starting point for values-based education? Because it seems to me that what you just said, his values resonated really strongly, and I wonder if there's a link.
A good question, Paul. I'm sure there is. I think all the values thing was being implicitly going through my mind. I can't say that I suddenly had this eureka moment and said, yes, values education back in 1970 or whatever it was.
Mm.
I can't claim that. But definitely how we are as human beings, our humanity, how we interact with one another, how we care for each other, how we lead each other, because the other part of my work is leadership. I'm known as Mr. Dr. Values through the world, but I'm also known and asked to speak on leadership. And leadership has always been really important to me, what I mean by leadership. So that I left my story at being appointed as Buckinghamshire's county advisor and one of the county advisors. And that gave me an opportunity to see lots of practice, to influence lots of practice, to learn from great thinkers such as Peter Lerway, naming one who most people will never have heard of, but he was really influential of me as a great advisor. So lots of people were influencing me. But after I finished in Buckinghamshire, I was appointed as Chief Advisor, Principal Education Officer of the Isle of Wight service, which has 120 schools. And I spent a number of years there leading teams. And that's where my leadership started to form. And I started to think, what is good leadership? And that's why I always say leadership is about not having a hierarchy of relationships, only a hierarchy of roles. So we all know what our role is and we have responsibility for that role. But I believe that a good organization is led when you're really clear that everybody is equal. So, I've always joked with schools, well, half joked, that, don't have collections of photographs of the staff with the head teacher at the top and the person that cleans the school at the bottom. That's a hierarchy of relationships. Muddle them up, make a circle of them, label everybody's roles, but it shows that everybody's equal. So you don't sort of look at something and say, oh, there's the boss and there's the person who doesn't have the same clout. And the second part of my philosophy on that is that the prime task of a leader is to release the creative dynamic of everybody in the organization. Hierarchy is based on relationships. Do not do that. Everyone looks to the boss to make a decision at all levels, rather than the youngest person in the organization who might have the most brilliant ideas, being, come on, Mary, you tell us what you think, and then the organization not looking down their nose, but saying, yeah, this is where we should be going. So these ideas formed, and whilst I was on the Isle of Wight, I realize that good organizations really do work with a leadership that where you're clear about yourself, because not everybody can be Neil Hawkes or Paul Barnett or whoever. You have to look at yourself and say, what is it about me that will enable others to flourish? So you build on your strengths. You build on your strengths. Um, so leadership was important on the Isle of Wight, but then whilst on the Isle of Wight, visiting schools and also visiting schools elsewhere, I was increasingly noticing that children were coming to school without what I now call an ethical vocabulary and understanding it. They didn't seem to have a grasp of words such as what respect actually means. What does care mean? What does quality? What's altruism all about? Compassion, empathy. Uh, they increasingly didn't have an idea. You could argue, did they have an idea before? But uh, we won't go into that now. But I was just noticing this, and I thought, what would happen if we deliberately, as science has a vocabulary, as mathematics has a vocabulary, what would happen to a school organization if you really did give the children access to that vocabulary? So I thought, well, the only way to do this is to resign my job as chief and become a head teacher again. Everyone thought I was absolutely crazy. They said, Neil, you've got a glorious career. What are you doing? You've already been a head teacher twice. It's a demotion. And I said, not on your life. It's not a demotion. It's the most important job in the world. I'm going to go and see what will happen. So I got found in the Times Ed. The Times Educational Supplement. In those days, we didn't have the internet. We just had the Times Educational Supplement with its appointments. So I looked for a head teacher's post, and there was a box. I always remember it, and it said, "Wanted, head teacher, West Kidlington School." And in small print underneath, it said, "Just burned down." I thought, wow, if it's just burned down, this is the place for me. Let's go and rebuild. What had happened, Paul, was that on bonfire night in the UK, we have this 5th of November bonfire night based on the story of Guy Fawkes. Horrible affair, really, when you think about it. Anyway, on one particular night, some people put fireworks through the front door of the school and caught it ablaze. Uh, 3/4 of the school was burned to the ground, except the nursery department, which remained because the firemen put the fire out. I'm smiling about it in one sense, but at the time it was tragic. The teachers were really upset because their lovely things that were in their store cupboards and that, it was all gone. But for me, it gave me an opportunity because I was appointed to the job when I went along. Um, and they said, yeah, you won't have a school built. It'll be built over the next 2 years. You'll have to have a school with huts on the field for a while. So I was a part of this raising, like Pegasus from the ashes, this school. And I had the most incredible supportive community in Kidlington, which is North Oxford, really. And ordinary people. This wasn't an area that was full of people that were university professors or something. This was an area where just people like you and me, just lovely people, and they gave me their full support, and the staff likewise. They're marvelous teachers and teaching assistants, and I was marvelous. But the important point is that what I did to going back to the ethical vocabulary, I teamed up with Oxford University and said, can we run a research project? Because I was interested to not only do something, but to show the evidence for whether it's successful or not. I'm someone who likes to back up what I say with evidence. I've got a small part of me that's an academic. I'm not generally an academic. Well, I think I have a nugget of being an academic. And so I just wanted to just make sure of that. So Oxford University, in the person of Professor Richard Pring, Richard died about a few weeks ago. He was one of my real heroes, moral philosopher, world renowned. He was the director of education at Oxford University, and I was privileged to be his student for a lot of years. And a lot of what I say, I think I'm the mouthpiece for Richard in some ways. And he's very kind to me personally, and he really sharpened up my writing and my way I think. Absolutely great man. So thank you, Richard, wherever you are now, for the help you gave me. So for 7 years, we brought in what we now call values-based education because it's based on values. Now, the important distinction I need to make, Paul, is that there's a huge difference between values education and values-based education. Values education is when you induct children into some values, which is great. Well, values-based education is that plus, and a big plus. Values-based education is when the school community, first of all, selects the values, so you're not imposing values on any community, because they could say, what right have you to say we should have this? So you have a forum. You have a forum and you invite your community to think, what dispositions do we want our children to develop in our community? And those dispositions, of course, are values. And we had one of these occasions and lots of argument. And you have a chart and you write up the values that people are saying, each table, if you've divided them into tables. And we've done this, by the way, in Australia. Professor Terence Lovett introduced this work in Australia throughout all Australian schools, and they had forum over there. But so what we did, we had this forum, and the community chose 22 words, values words, that it thought was important for their children to develop. So we thought, well, 22 words, let's divide that into 2 years. So 11 values for 1 year, and followed by the next year having another 11 values. And you would focus on the value for a month. So I would introduce the value in an assembly, and then the teaching staff were asked to follow that up by an experiential, emphasize experiential session about that value. At the same time, all the values, the 22, would be being talked about implicitly. So children would come into the room. Well done, you two, for showing so much cooperation out on the playground. Mary, you were so caring. So the point is that the adults are talking the talk and also modeling being the most important. It's no point this isn't about what you do to children. It's about how adults take on the values and model those out. Hugely difficult because, we all have aspects of our personality, which I might come on to later. But what we found in the research was that it had an enormous effect. Number one effect, the effect it had on adults in the community. That's surprising, isn't it? You'd think, what effect does it have on the children? Well, first of all, the adults. In the research, it showed that the adults, it would be grandiose to say that it changed them. But what it did was, through having that language themselves, it made them reflect on their teaching and reflect on their own behavior. Yeah, how were they respecting the children? Did they expect children to open doors for them, or did they open doors sometimes for children? Just simple things, you know. So it had an enormous effect. And because of the unity of the staff, which came about because of the values, they enjoyed the work even more. There was harmony in the school. There wasn't a battle between students and staff. Everyone got on well together. Um, so it was incredible. Behavior of children. Oh, incredible. People would come and visit the school. We became known and people wanted to come. They came from all over the world. And they didn't understand how ordinary children would behave so well without me shouting at them or telling them to behave. If you give children agency through understanding an ethical vocabulary, it's remarkable. Now, that doesn't mean to say we didn't have children who perhaps we would now call neurodiverse, who we had to give special attention to, special nurturing, but always those children felt that we were respecting them. And we'll come on to the word dignity perhaps later, Paul, but giving children dignity, the ability, though they feel that you're nurturing their essential essence as a human being. I think, you know, Donna Hicks, I have to congratulate you on your amazing work on dignity, because I think that that really does underpin what we should all be thinking about now to help our world. So, Paul, I'll stop there because I'm over talking and giving a long talk about this. But that was the beginnings of values-based education and the research. Oh, the other bit of research that was important was that academic diligence improved. So this isn't about fuzzy, let's all be nice and kind to each other. It has a sharp edge, which means that because of agency, the children's academic results went up because they were keen to learn. You know, they enjoyed learning. And so this work has been replicated, as you said, around the world at various different stages. And, you know, there's still so much to do.
Okay, well, thanks. I want to move on and make the link with dignity now because, in the Salon program, what I'm trying to do is make sure the interviews connect and flow and people can see the connections quite clearly. So you've just mentioned that. And I think that there are direct similarities between what you've just said and what Donna talks about as well. So it starts with consciousness, and you used 22 words in the example you just gave that were about bringing about a consciousness that hadn't really existed before. And I've talked recently in things that I've written and spoken about the importance of consciousness. It's a bit like I usually compare it with putting your own face mask on first on an aeroplane, because until you're in a position where you're yourself conscious of where your thoughts and ideas come from, you're not really in a position to be able to help anybody else that's struggling with how they want to maybe change or adapt their own thinking
Mm.
um, in a positive way. And that seems to me to be absolutely central to teaching. It would seem that teaching is about consciousness more than anything else, making people aware, and we talk a lot in business about, in organizations, about change management these days. To me, change doesn't happen unless you, first of all, understand where your existing thinking comes from, which most of us don't stop to reflect on. We basically have worldviews, which we almost operate on autopilot without understanding where our thinking comes from. It's so the consciousness part is absolutely key, because if we're conscious, we can then reflect on how appropriate or inappropriate our existing thinking about things may or may not be in the context that we're in today. And I think, given the amounts of conflict and problems in the world right now, never has it been more important for people to think and reflect on that. But You also then, talked about the 22 words and they represent the values. So I think the point there is that consciousness about values is probably the most important thing we need to be conscious about. Um, and we've had conversations, you and I, in the past about uh, dignity, and Donna talks specifically about dignity consciousness. And I think it relates to what you just said about agency,
Mm.
because dignity consciousness gives us agency over ourselves and over our relationships with other people.
Mm.
So I know you've had a look at the interview that we did with Donna and her work and so on. So I wonder if you could move the conversation on now by just talking about the link between your values-based education work and what you've taken from
Mm.
what you've seen of Donna's work on dignity and the link between the two. I think that would be a good next step in this conversation if you're happy to do that.
Very much so. You were triggering in my mind when you're talking about consciousness, Paul. Um, I was talking 2 days ago to a partnership of schools called the Tame Partnership of Schools, 12 schools in Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire. And it was time for me to talk with them about quality education. And I do talk now about my work being about quality education and values-based education being a route that helps you establish quality education. Um, but I ended the talk with a slide that showed the world, and on the right-hand side, I talked about consciousness, that the outcome really of all this work is enabling young people to be more aware. I sometimes use the word aware rather than conscious, but it's the same thing really, being more aware. There's one element in my work that I didn't mention in the previous answer, and that is a huge part of values education, which is often difficult for many schools. They get all the vocabulary bit.
Mm.
That's the easy bit, but the more challenging bit is what I introduced with my wonderful colleagues, which we called reflective practice. So, just to give an example, at an assembly, I may tell a story that would illustrate someone who's showing a particular value. And then I would stop and I would have what I now call a brain break. A brain break is when you give people the opportunity to be silent, to be introspective, and to really let what they've heard just go in their mind. I'm doing it now myself, so that you have an awareness which is just not cognitive, but it's your what you're doing is you're bringing the essence of who you are to that thinking and saying, well, what is it? So the children were helped to think, well, I've heard what Dr. Hawkes has said. How will I use that during the day? How will that affect my behavior when I'm playing with my friends? How will I use that value? And I would leave them. And I once did this as a bit of fun with some visitors. I said, I'll leave them for a long time and see what happens. And I left the children, I think, for a quarter of an hour in silent reflection, about 500 children, and there wasn't a movement in the room. And the visitors said, "You must threaten them, you can't get children to do that." And I said, "Well, if you train children from the age of 3 to be inwardly reflective, then this is the result. You enable people not to act just by a thought or an instinct. You're allowing them to have that pause. So this is pause to be. So reflective practice, I think, is absolutely key. Many adults find it really difficult because they're not used to. Now I begin every day with half an hour's inward reflection that begins my day. My wife Jane does it too, so that we set ourselves up to have a clear intellect during the day. So that consciousness bit is really important. I often talk about having three hearts. Just to digress for a moment, Paul, forgive me. I was in India last year, and in India, I was invited to be a keynote speaker at a big conference, and my hosts afterwards took me to a temple in a village, away from everything. And I was wandering about, and a little boy, probably about 10 or 11 years age, rushed up to me and he started touching me. And I had short sleeves on, and he started doing this. And I looked at him and I thought, oh, what's going on here? I was a bit sort of that at first. But then he was so friendly. And I said, hello. And he said, hello. I just wanted to touch you because I've never seen anybody with your colour skin.
Mm.
And I said, that's all right. Yes, we're all different. I live in a different country. And then his mum came in and she said, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I said, please, I was really honored that he wanted to do that. And then she started to talk to me and she said, I want him to be respectful. I want his character to develop. And I said, oh, you might be interested in what I do then. Anyway, I then went back to the conference and I was asked to do another session. I talked about three hearts. First heart is your physical heart, the heart that's pumping in my body, keeping me alive this morning. Thank the Lord. That's the first heart, an important heart. Without that, we can't do anything. And then there's a second heart, which I call the spiritual heart. The spiritual heart is the seat of our consciousness. It is the seat of the essence of who we are. Religions call it the soul. Psychotherapists will say it's the self-energy, it's whatever. Jung got onto that. And different people will refer to it in different ways, but it's essentially your essence. And values education helps to develop that essence of who you are, because there's a third heart, which I refer to as the emotional heart. The emotional heart is full of how we feel. At this moment, I'm feeling quite happy and energized because I'm talking to you, Paul. I was on a phone call just before, and there was another part of my personality that was showing up itself, and I had to calm it down a bit. So we all have emotional reactions and that emotional stuff going on. So we have to come back to that spiritual heart. If each person in the world, Paul, could just be more conscious of having that essence of themselves. You talked just now about how we have a frame of reference, how we see the world. Why do we see the world in the way we do? Well, if each of us could hold up the mirror to ourselves and say, well, what is our worldview based on? How did we develop that? What values did I get? What voices did I hear? I remember hearing voices in my childhood that could have meant that now I was a racist because they would say horrendous things. But as a young child, I used to think, oh, that's not right. And I would challenge it. And so holding up the mirror is really important. And before I come on to Donna, the last thing I would say is that the real outcome, which my research showed on values-based education, and that I've developed over the last few years, is that values-based education with the reflection, with the words, and by the way, there's more than 22 words now. I always advise schools to have a bank of words. You can't limit it to 22. So you have another group of words that feed into those 22. And the important point is that by giving children access to a values-based education which produces quality education, what you are doing is that you are enabling them to be ethically intelligent. Ethical intelligence is the ability to ethically, morally, if you want to use that word, self-regulate your own behavior. And it's that ability to self-regulate your behavior, that skill, which is missing from our world. Just listen to
It
Trump.
certainly seems to be missing from certain leaders in the world right now.
Absolutely. They just don't have it. They just kick off with whatever comes into their head based on their prejudice and their right wing or their left wing or wherever wing they are because of their worldview that is corrupted. I said at the United Nations a couple of years ago in Geneva when I was talking there that show me a leader that is not corrupt. Cool, I took a chance on that one. But the point is, there are very few leaders in the world, Paul, I'm sad to say, that aren't corrupted in some way. So I just think, and this is where I get really excited, that if we could give children access to what I'm talking about, and that the whole community of our country realized that we would raise consciousness, we would have greater awareness, people wouldn't drive past me in my lane down the road and splash me with their cars because their awareness would kick in and say, I'm just passing a pedestrian, I'll slow down. We just lack that awareness. So the great skill that comes from my work is this raising, shifting consciousness level so that we can be more aware of our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, so that we can be more humane, so that we can generate systems in the world that will be those systems that will help our planet survive some more years. Donna's work is absolutely outstandingly brilliant. She's done a lot of negotiating with people in difficult situations, and her work just touches my heart because it's quite right. If you do not acknowledge the dignity of another human being, then it spins off into all sorts of ways, resentment, and you have what I call limiting values cropping up, jealousies, and all the rest of it crops up. So each one of us really needs to think how we are living as dignified people, and how we are encouraging others to look at other people in the world in a way that going back to what I said really earlier in this interview, is seeing everybody as an equal human being. There's an Ubuntu saying in South Africa which says the person in front of you is the same as you. Einstein said, we all share in the same consciousness. Each one of us downloads into here, in the womb or wherever, consciousness. But it's humanity. Paul, you are the same as me. Therefore, if your consciousness and my consciousness is the same, then how could I possibly harm you or do anything to hurt you? And if we can shift humanity in this direction, and I'm always being accused of being idealistic, but I make no apology for it because more and more people need to have these ideals, which is not preaching to others, but it's helping people to connect with that inner world, which we might come on to now. So I'll stop for a moment. I don't know if I answered your question, Paul, but there we are.
Yes, I think you did. I mean, one of the things that in Donna's work makes it really real for me is the fact that if you honor somebody else's dignity, your own dignity is enhanced at the same time, which makes it a very relational a value to consider. What many people who are unconscious of the importance of dignity don't realize is the damage they're doing to themselves. So when you harm the dignity of others, you're also undermining your own dignity. But it's a thing that we're unfortunately rarely conscious of, and it doesn't just relate to our relationships with other people. So we can respect the inherent worth, which is what dignity is, of anything or any other person or any being, and including the planet, the environment, future generations, and so on. But it's extremely powerful. I would very much hope that every kid gets to learn the value of it. And I know Donna works with children on this topic, and some of the schools that she's working with actually, after the kids have gone through the process, get a badge and become what Desmond Tutu called agents of dignity. imagine a world in which we're all agents of dignity. Where we're moving here with the conversation is, what is the purpose of education?
Mm.
Um, and so we've in this conversation we've mentioned three or four people that we've lost recently were remarkable people. You mentioned two, and I mentioned Charles Handy earlier. I interviewed Charles Handy some time ago. And in part of that interview, I mean, it was a wide-ranging interview over about 4 hours. We touched on education, and he was highly critical of the current state of education. Would agree with many of the things that you're saying, and the other famous educationalist that I know that we all greatly admire, Ken Robinson. Ken Robinson, of course, links back to the comments you were making earlier about essence.
Mm.
I think that was in the title of one of his most famous books, Finding Your Essence, which relates to one of my heroes, which is Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning.
Mine too.
Meaning and essence are one and the same thing, I think. So the just going to, I wanted to in this conversation just highlight some of the things that came out of my interview with Charles that are relevant that I've not yet published, and get your views on those, if I may. And focusing really specifically on purpose of education. Can I maybe start by just I'll share what Charles said to me, but before I do that, I don't want to influence what your thoughts are.
Mm.
I wonder whether you could say what you think the purpose of education is, and whether you think the education system as it is at the moment is meeting that purpose.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for that. I do agree about your heroes. Yeah. Viktor Frankl is one of mine. I met his granddaughter some years ago, and his book actually was had an incredible effect on me when I first read it, and thinking about our meaning and purpose in life. And I think values-based education and education should be about that. Uh, because as Frankl said, what is created in the modern world is an existential vacuum, a vacuum that needs to be filled. And what is happening in humanity is they look for to fill that vacuum by alcohol, sex, drugs, too much television, too much everything, not being involved with the environment and things. So that's how the vacuum can be filled. Uh, but there is this essence of humanity that doesn't want that. It wants something else. And Frankel's own research showed that the majority of young people are desperate to be given some clues onto how to have a meaning and purpose for themselves. And that's what I think my work and many other people's work has helped children to do. And that's one of the main purposes of education, is to find that meaning and purpose by giving a rich, varied, holistic education that inducts you into the great thinking of the world. Because as my dear friend, Professor Bart McGettrick, people often think I said this originally, but I didn't. Bart McGettrick did. And he used to say, education is a conversation between generations about matters of significance. Wow! Isn't that great? Can you imagine classrooms where that really is the case and where it isn't, oh, we haven't got time for that. We must get on because the syllabus says we've got to move on to this, 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 this. Otherwise, you're not going to pass your exam. We haven't got time for man's search for meaning. Oh, no, that's not important. Let's get on with the curriculum. I know I'm being a bit fun on that, but there's a serious point behind that. So, yeah, the purpose of education is the flourishing of humanity and the flourishing of our planet. If we do something that's not going to do that, it cannot be the purpose of education. But let me say, Paul, there's two things, you say. There's education and there's schooling. And what we talk about education and schooling in the same sentence, but they're two different things. Uh, And there has never, as you've said in a lot of your writings, there's never been a debate in this country about the purpose of education. What has happened since the 1870s is that we have bolted on bits to education, schooling. We've bolted things on. And there is this incredible vested interest in the system as it is. You know, I don't like Ofsted, for instance, but you can't get rid of Ofsted because there's so many people that have a vested interest. And there are often people that have been head teachers. They say, oh, yes, this is good. Whereas if you talk about Ofsted in a vacuum, they say, no, it's not the right thing. It's not cooperative. It's not professional. It's shaming. It's all sorts of things. But we continue with these systems, and it's not just in education. So let's be clear that when schooling is what we're, let's just pick on England, what we're delivering. And there's some great organizations. I'm an ambassador for one called the Federation of Educational Development, FED. FED is really looking at, what should we be doing in education. But I sense even in FED, which I admire and think that still that vested interest of the people in the system that holds it back because we haven't had that national debate, which isn't politically inspired. Uh, it needs to be something bigger than that. Whether this country is big enough to, in the sense of being grown up enough to actually do that, I don't know. But when you ask me about the purpose of education, I can't think of a purpose that's bigger than the survival of us. I have grandchildren, and when I look at the state, 1 in 5 children is now suffering from mental illness in schools. Teachers 2 days ago were telling me, Neil, our biggest issue is the challenging behavior we have from neurodiversity. We agree with you that we have to care for all children, but faced with 30 children in a class, with 1 in 5 children having issues of mental health or whatever you like to call it, it's a huge challenge. And then the question is, well, is what we are doing in schools relevant? It's a bolt-on system. Do we really need to rethink what
Is it actually causing that problem?
is it causing the problem? Exactly. And I think it is. Uh, Poor head teachers that I meet, just do their best. But when they're trying to do, I said to one, well, do you agree with what I've said this morning? They says, yes, Neil, you're absolutely right. But Ofsted will come in and ask and look at data connected to things that have nothing to do with you. And if I don't have that, they will shame me and they will say we require improvement. Improvement because nothing to do with education, but we're not meeting the targets that this arbitrary body has decided is important for us. So I can get passionate about this. We do need a renaissance, and you're the big man on renaissance, Paul. We need a renaissance whereby we really think if we're going to survive on this planet, what are we going to do with an education system? And let's get away with vested interests, with our mindsets that are based on a political thing or whatever. How we do that, I don't know. But in the meantime, I want to give every child that's possible access to a values-based education because I do think it helps them to raise awareness and actually think about their meaning and their purpose in their lives.
Well, let me just, before I move on, I'll just make a point for viewers of this that we've mentioned several people and several books and so on. So related to this video, I'll put references in the details. The Enlightened Enterprise Academy, we're doing quite a lot of work in systems thinking. And it seems to me systems thinking play a big part in rethinking, reimagining, redesigning education system because it is a system. It basically is another example to me of a system that's broken. People talk about the broken system, but they usually mean broken systems because you look at nearly all of our systems and they're not really doing what we would like them to be doing. Systems have recently referred to the work of one systems thinker, Stafford Beer, and his phrase, the purpose of a system is what it does. POSIWID is the abbreviation of that. And when you stop and think about that, it's really interesting because it begs the question, as I've said in the articles I've written about it, does for who? And systems to me don't change if they're serving the interest of the people who've got power and control over the system and
Mhm.
if it's serving them. So if we identify what the system is doing and who it's doing it for, we can usually identify the source of the problem. If we're not happy, we need to shift the power balance within the system and work out why is it not serving the people it's designed to serve, children in the case of education. Most of our systems are not even serving the people that the system had been designed to serve. If you look at the histories of the way systems were developed, again, it's about consciousness. It's about consciousness about why do we think about these systems in the way we think about them. So education was about producing children that were going to be good employees in the workforce. Well, if you take that particular example, nowadays, most employers are basically criticizing the education system because it's not producing employable people. Um, and who is education serving? In the interview with Charles Handy, he suggested that it's serving the education system. The education system then in the whole taking into account universities because every school is basically training every student to be able to go to university. Um, so the education system is serving itself. If you look at it in that sense, he made a very controversial comment, I think, in the interview I did with him, which is, in his view, formal education should probably stop at 14. 20% of the population at most should be going to university. It's not a case of really formal schooling stops at 14, but education really doesn't. But it changes
Yeah.
to become tutored education, where people are doing something akin to an apprenticeship type tutored education, but it's a properly structured approach. So I think understood like that, it's probably less controversial to most people than it might first appear. And I'm sure the journalists who don't like the idea would be able to pick on what he said and come up with a horrible headline. But I think actually the vast majority of people would agree that, and you described your own experience. You
Mm.
left at 16, as you were describing that, it made me think about what Charles was saying. Everything you were describing was what it was really kind of an untutored education, whether you went into in the hospital. But if that had been a tutored process, that would have been an even more valuable education in your formative years. I think Charles suggested we need to tutor them for the life they're going to lead. And I said to him in response to that, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. But do we have teachers that are capable of doing that? Do any of us know what life we're going to lead? Your life, you described it, turned out to be very different from the life I think you imagined you would lead. And I think most people's lives take a course that's very random. And I mean, I certainly never imagined doing what I'm doing. And my life's been a roller coaster in many respects. It's been a really interesting journey, but very unpredictable one. And that sort of pathway through life is messy for most people, I think, these days, and increasingly so. So in that situation, it means that it's even more important to teach life skills as the basis of education, maybe than academic, what we traditionally think of as academic subjects. Yes, okay, you need some of those as well, but they on their own are insufficient to get us through life in the way that we would hope to help people get through their lives?
I think you've said so much that I so agree with. Um, the first point I make, following on from meaning and purpose, when I've got that as the sort of big thing, I think when you now drill down, I think it is about self leadership. And the self, I'm meaning that essence of who you are, not all the other stuff that's going on. So, how do we develop a self leadership that is altruistic and is full of those enhancing values? So that I think is a purpose. I so agree with you. I've sat in so many secondary schools and watched the children, and let's say boys of 17 who in no way want to be in that classroom. They're at a stage of their development in adolescence, which is so the opposite of what they're being made to do, to sit down, to listen, to copy notes from the board, to write, to be still, not to engage. And I know teachers in secondary were listening to me and say, Neil, you're overstating this. But there's an essence of what I mean. And so many head teachers say to me, we've got these young people in our schools and they don't want to be there. They cause us problems, etc., etc. And I think that goes back to this raising of the school leaving age. My mother left school at 14 and became an apprentice hairdresser in the Rhondda Valley in Wales. And she became highly successful, but she went into an apprenticeship. My father left school at 14. He became very successful too in so many ways. Why did we suddenly think that increasingly? I think we've, in one sense, extended childhood, and in another sense, we haven't allowed young people to grow up. If you can imagine being a 14-year-old and you go to the local factory and you're working with men, grown-up men, they soon induct you into adulthood. You can't act like an adolescent playing up and be peevish. You grow up and you take responsibility. But we now have adolescents that don't have responsibility. They've been parented in a helicopter way. They haven't got resilience. And there's been a report out this week I read in the BBC feed about resilience being needed. Well, a book that my wife and I wrote called The Inner Curriculum is all about how we develop well-being and resilience. And the whole thing is that you actually think about that internal world. My wife's a psychotherapist and well known in that field. And she has helped me understand that one of the drawbacks in education is that people go and get educated in training colleges, universities, or on the job, and they don't have the wisdom that comes from other disciplines. Talha Shahar, the Israeli academic, once at a lecture, I remember him talking about how up until 1800 and something, the educated person knew everything. And then we put everything in boxes. So one box knows a lot of this, and another box knows a lot of this, but they don't know each other's boxes. So I've always argued in education, let's know what the psychotherapists think. What do they, so that we can not become them, but have an awareness which will help us. So self-leadership is absolutely crucial, I think, for transforming things. Self-leadership is absolutely key, Paul, I think, and that understanding of your internal world, understanding that we're multi-personality. The great film, I don't know if listeners have watched, Inside Out. 1 and 2. But if you watch Inside Out, the Pixar films, you will get a beginning of an understanding of multi-personality, which great thinkers have talked about for a long time. But at the center of those multi-personality is the essential you, which isn't the one that's been biased through worldviews and all the rest. It is you, and that's where we can unite in dignity with each other.
Actually, can I just pick up on a point which, so we've talked about the inner, the inner, the individual, and the our own personal essence and so on, and personal responsibility, and all of that to some people sounds like advocating for being individualistic and not being responsible to society. There's a big debate at the moment going on about how individualistic we should be, and whether our societies are breaking down now because we're too individualistic. So I think you would agree that it's not instead of, it's and. We need to be sort of self-aware. We need to be aware, in control of our own lives and so on. We need to be personally resilient, but we achieve that by knowing how to manage our relationships with other people, with the communities we live in, and so on. So it requires both, yeah.
You're so right. Number one, the values words, so cooperation, altruism, unity, they all help you to inner reflect on your connection. A great book that I have read, and I know the author increasingly very well, and I do commend this book to you, The Connected Species. But The Connected Species is all about how we've only survived on this planet because we are connected. We can only survive if we work in cooperation. We would never have lasted as a species had we not been able to cooperate with each other. So there's a lot of these values that are inherent within us. Dignity, you mentioned, cooperation, care, love, they're all in us. So we need to turn the volume up on that. It's having that balance between responsibility and rights. you know, um, Sir Ken Robinson, who you mentioned earlier, and I have always said that the education system got out of balance. We had the cognitive, the emphasis, and the affective domains were down there. And I've always said we've got to do that. And it's the same with these two aspects. Me as an individual, I hope I'm important, inverted commas, important, but I also think, Paul, you're equally important, and I think everyone around us. So how do we balance that community? Because we will only survive on community, and the problem is we have drifted towards individualism. But we need much more community. It is the village that raises a child, not the individual. And as a head teacher of a school where so many parents felt socially isolated on their own and not in community and suffered because of that, I think we need to regenerate that whole sense of togetherness and responsibility for each other. Why is it we just think we should stick our parents in an old folks' home and it's the state's responsibility to look after them? Why has that suddenly happened in our community, that we don't have a sense of care for each other because it's inconvenient now to feel that way? And I know listeners will say, well, there are all sorts of reasons why we should have care homes. I'm sure there are, but always ask the question, is this the right thing?
Okay, well, that's all really interesting to well, to me, and I'm sure it will be to the listeners. But I want to, as we're coming towards the end of the interview, I wanted to just do two things. Um, I mentioned systems thinking earlier, and one other aspect of systems thinking that I think could be really useful. There's a concept, Ross Atkoff, an American systems thinker, used it, called idealized design. And I wonder whether, to bring about the debate we talked about earlier at the national level and not at a political level necessarily, whether there's a way in which we could maybe think about what, or even as individuals, maybe we should think about what is the ideal design of an education system to achieve that purpose, if we can agree on what the purpose that we've just been exploring is. And uh, I wonder whether you've got some thoughts on that. And also, I know you've been working on projects around the world related to what you're doing. So I wonder if you could also offer a few maybe glimmers of hope as part of the reply.
Right. Education, schooling, to think of as a circle, a circle. Now, in that system are subjects, maths, English, or whatever your language is, mathematics, science. So you've got the subjects. In a very little bit of the circle down here is character education, character development, how we enable people to be the best people that they should be. It's a little circle down there. In the English system, it's called personal social education. So we have that. Um, and that's what's out of balance. Now, I would like to see another circle. So you've got that circle. I'd like to see another circle. And this time, um, this is all about character development. By character development, that's all about the individual, how you help them to be a social animal in cooperation, excuse me, with other people. So you have your subjects, and I don't decry the subjects. We do need to know about subjects and things. That's important. But if you think of this circle with the character development, I think it should fit over the other circle. And where the two circles overlap, that's where I put wisdom, Paul. That's wisdom. And that's what we need humanity to draw out, is the wisdom of humanity. We've got lots of it. We've been thinking as a species for at least 2,000 years and a lot more about what it means to be human. There's so much that we have in knowledge, skills. Some people keep on reinventing. We need to really, really think about what we've got. So if we have this character and this lovely conversation, as Bart said, between generations about matters of significance. The matters are all in those subjects and in that. So if we can get those two things to go together, then we have what I call a new basic education. So not let basic education be this crude schooling, but an education which enhances every individual to be the best person that they can be on this planet. You mentioned places. Yeah, not long ago I was in Cambodia and I was actually on a visit and our guide took us into a school. I can't resist it if I'm in a school. And it was amazing, not like so many Western countries where you have to ask the receptionist if you can go in, and then you have to show that you've been vetted by the police and you're not going to assault anybody, and the school is all locked with gates and you have to have a fob to get in. We have prisons now in England, not schools. Absolutely amazing. Anyway, not in Cambodia. I walked in and Jane was with me and we just wandered about and we wandered into a classroom and first thing, great humility, great humility. Not what are you doing here, stranger? Great humility. May I help you? I'm very interested. I'm interested in education. And this wonderful man called Nil Pesh, who I've got to know, uh, invited me to come into the classroom. And I saw what they were doing. Few of the children could actually speak some English, which was amazing. And I talked to him, and then I talked to him about values-based education. And he said, "Oh, that resonates with so much of what we're trying to do here in developing the children. Could you do a training for the staff?" And I thought, this is going to be difficult because I don't speak Khmer. Anyway, what happened was when I left the school, I recorded, and listeners could go on to www.valuesbasededucation.com and they can listen to me giving the talk to the staff of that school in Khmer because it was translated by Nil Pesh. Everything I said accurately translated into the local language. And as a result of that, that school has now doing incredible work in values-based education, building on a lot of the reflective work that it naturally does. Eastern schools naturally do a lot of reflective work, which Western schools don't do. The curriculum, he's really looked at it. Um, but it was very interesting looking at the basis of Cambodian education, which is about um, looking after each other, making sure that at the end of the day you clean the classroom. I thought that was amazing. All sorts of things to help the child get agency and responsibility for themselves. Now, that school is linked to another of the values-based schools in Thailand, the Meriton School in Thailand, an independent international school, the British school in Thailand, which is doing amazing work as a quality school, doing values-based education. And those two schools are now talking. I'll be in New Zealand in a few weeks' time, and I will go into Lee Primary School. Lee Primary School is doing a lot of values-based work, as is Snell's Beach School, only a few miles away, and many New Zealand schools, because I've talked to all the heads and in New Zealand over many years. And I hope to pop across to Australia. Australia invited me to be one of their experts a number of years ago. They had a change of government, Paul, and much of the work that we did with Professor Terence Lovett on values work was thrown out of the window by the politicians because they said, we have to get back to basics. We need more literacy, more mathematics, etc. They're now saying that was a great mistake. And yeah, you educate not by giving people more and more of what they're not good at. You do it in other ways.
Hmm.
So it's fascinating me. I could go on to talk about Iceland, Scandinavia, which they're doing great work in these sort of areas. Um, I'm wanting to influence Africa more. There's some great stuff going on there, but that's on my target range. And I've also, helped with schools in the Middle East. I've helped in the UAE developing things, and I've also been in conversation now with Saudi Arabia that's looking at its basic education and being worried about, yeah, they have great international schools and that, but their basic education for the ordinary people leaves a lot to be desired. Their words, not mine. And I've been supporting them with some of my thoughts. So lots going on. My heart breaks when I hear about the inhumanity to humanity that's going on in parts of the Middle East and others. I don't want to open up that subject because it breaks my heart. But as my friend again, Bart McKettrick said, who does a lot of work in Gaza, he said some people in Gaza said the key to us is not food, it is education. Education is what will make things better in the long run. And that's the education, Paul, that you and I believe in, not the indoctrination which is given by politicians who want to rewrite history so it shows them up in the right way. Syria's got a new regime. Our worry there is that the current regime will now rewrite history again, as the Russians have done and we'll probably see that in the United States. So keep politicians out of education. Uh, let's release the creative dynamic of us all. Those of you listening to me, you may not be a teacher, but you can influence what happens in education by asking questions of your local school. Really sort of be a cheerleader for what good education could be. And then we would change the system. Parents are voters. Change the mindset of parents, and we can change, Paul, your system. So enough from me. It's been a great privilege, and I hope there's been one or two things I've said this morning, Paul, that will touch the hearts or resonate with the minds of people listening. And as I said at the beginning, let's continue the noble conversation and let's change the world.
Fantastic. I think you're a visual thinker, if I understand correctly, and I am as well. So, as you were talking about the ideal system, and the overlapping circles and so on. A different vision popped into my mind of a circle, but with your three hearts at the center of it, and then the rest of the curriculum being the universe of subjects around it.
Oh, I love that. I love your model better than mine. Let's have your model.
Well, we can explore these models, but I think that could be a conversation that flows from this.
Yeah.
Um, Next in the Salon series, I'm hoping to interview somebody that's working on a subject that we talked about. She's a professor emeritus um, at the Ivy University in Canada. Her name is Mary Croissant. So we've talked about character in the conversation today.
Hmm.
We've talked about character in what gets taught to children, but we need to talk about character in the workplace and in other types of organizations and how it's important there.
Hmm.
So I think we can follow on, make the connection between the conversation today and that conversation quite easily, and the flow of this series of dialogues that are the Salon initiative, the inflection point. We're at an inflection point, but we're exploring here how to make sure the way we go is the right way.
Hmm.
And that links to the book that I'm working on now as we begin 2025, which is going to be titled The Better Way. Um, and we'll explore all of the different elements that are part of what I mean by the better way. All right, let's stop there. I think that's been really good.